Rob. Totally. Totally with a
Brandon.
haircut. What's up, dude?
Are you lost?
Am I lost? No, I asked to be here. And this is Tom. This is a friend of mine. I asked him to be here too. I hope
Hey,
you guys.
Tom. Welcome. That was very, very not welcoming first thing.
It's okay, man. I know where you're coming from. Yeah. Kevin, what's up?
What's up? Hey guys.
That's pretty epic, right?
That space though, Ray.
You're like on that you know, the Battlestar Galactica ship that had like the plants and like the botanical gardens,
raise my
right? Right, guys?
Yeah,
Is that where Liz
still working.
usually is?
I'm secretly in Biosphere 3. Yeah, she's right next to me.
Ah.
Please tell me that phone is plugged into a cell phone.
Okay,
Please tell me that phone is
everyone.
plugged into a cell phone. Sorry.
I think it's like USB. It's, yeah.
I was trying to get around to responding to your talk content. No, that's okay. We got really into the viewing the EPA TRI on a map, and I guess
I'm just gonna move. So I just posted the agenda to the chat channel because HackMD is down, but we've got a bit to talk about today. So why don't we get into it? But I see a new face that others might know, but I don't. Thomas, did I?
Hey, I'm Tom.
Shoot.
My work at Query, Brendan's right here.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I asked Tom to join because he's our lead data scientist, and so it'll make sense more later.
Oh,
But yeah. I figured. Is that okay?
Excellent.
If it's not okay, I can tell Tom to leave. But I mean, he's here now.
No. It's-
Okay, good.
The more the merrier. My video is frozen, so I don't know if I'm about to get booted or not, but I hear audio, so we'll see what happens. But welcome, Thomas, or Tom. I just wanted to quickly talk about, so wait, can everyone hear me or see my video? Yeah, see you and hear you fine. Okay, it's weird. Everyone else is sort of frozen except for Brendan. Great, and Kevin. Okay, so why don't we just quickly talk about two things. One is the All Edgy meeting tomorrow. I'm happy. We have 5 minutes for the software side and then 5 minutes for the analyst side. I'm happy. I think I got great feedback from both Toli and Rob on what to talk about. There is a slide deck, which I can share also. Let's see. But my main question is for the group, does anyone want to do the demo? I'm happy to do it, but if anyone wants to, please raise a hand or let me know. I always like having, people doing the work, showing their work. So Kevin, I don't know if you want to show Scanner because I know you worked a lot on the UI, but I'm happy to do it either way.
I haven't been dealing with like the analysts and how they've been using it a lot lately, so probably not.
That's totally fine.
Yeah.
For the first one, I can wing it. It'll be fine. But I have the slides up. So if anyone has comments on it, please edit or leave a comment as we work on it. Next is, we might table it, but there was some just talk about documentation and changes to documentation, which is something that I'm thinking that for the next short term, I would love to dive into more now that like a lot of the funding and some of the admin stuff is sort of, I think, in a more steady state. But maybe we'll table that because I know there's a lot of other issues we wanted to talk about. That I just wanted to put it out there, and we can continue that conversation offline, if that makes sense. But if anyone had a quick comment or question about that, in the meanwhile, please let me know. All right. It's really unnerving because all the videos are frozen, but I'll keep on going. So next up is Toli. Do you want to give a quick analyst update?
Sure. The quick update is that the report writing and reviewing team has just had met for the third time for a third training session, and probably set up bi-weekly meetings to check in about reports. There are 4 currently that are being written / vetted, and we're using sort of the end of the training process to get those analysts to actually produce like real reports and get them out. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow, or Jake will give an update about that tomorrow at the all Edgy meeting.
Great.
Yep. And other than that, I think there are just some interesting trends and directions that are emerging, and research team is pursuing. One thing that maybe folks like Brendan don't know is that the research team is looking at doing like term-based analysis. I mean, we've been talking about this for a while, but actually there's some momentum building around that to compare a batch of web pages at one point in time to another point in time and just like count number of terms and do that in a systematic way. So Eric Nost is helping lead that, and it's ongoing. Any feedback or input there would be awesome. I don't know, maybe that's also something Tom might be interested in, but
That's great. I don't want to interrupt the flow of the meeting. I have so many questions, but maybe we'll chat sidebar.
Sounds good.
Can you hear us, Ray? Uh-oh. Ray? Oh no.
Ray!
he's kind of moving every once in a while for me.
Yeah, it looks like he just froze. I saw his eyes starting back and forth, and then that was it.
The deer in the headlights look and then gone.
Has anyone else like had an idea of like going back and watching the gap when you are missing on the recording of your own?
Let's all just go around and say something nice about Ray.
Ray's the best. I think Ray's lovely. And that's not because it was prompted to. I think he's a great human.
He is a very good human.
I concur.
So while that's, can I ask questions about the term-based analysis while we're waiting? Yeah. So okay. So is this like text search? We're looking at a collection. So this X set of pages, this, and then is it questions of frequency from snapshots, like, or is it what's the thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a simpler version of like the actual analysis that the kind of work that we do in reports, because basically it's just counting number of times like term X appears. It'd be nice, we're working on like breaking that down by like which part of the, what HTML tag is that associated with. So if it's like sidebar versus footer, or body, that's relevant because you might have a bunch of mentions of like climate change on the sidebar, and that's the same. But then actually the thing you want to know is whether like from the body, like terms were removed. It's so I think the idea is also that you would have like you want to have your corpus set. So we're using like Internet Archive, Wayback Machine snapshots as sort of like this is the batch from time window A and this is the batch from time window B, and then anyone can reproduce the analysis on that later rather than using like live pages.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So, I mean, I think the pipeline is pretty set, but we just need to actually do it. And the thing I'm most worried about is like false positives and how do we make sure we interpret things that are a bit funkier, where there's like dynamic elements and at least have something that flags for us that's like this might not be accurate.
I want that button in every part of my life. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot more to talk about, like hypothesis, like how we're trying to approach it from a hypothesis-driven perspective. So we're not like cherry picking the words.
That makes a lot of sense because this, that really it strikes me that like the actual mechanics of the collection are far sort of pale in comparison to the like actual prep is like the rigorous approach to doing this the right way.
Right.
That's what do you actually do with the data? What are you trying to go looking for?
Right.
Hello, Ray. Are you back? No.
Should we maybe just continue on? All right.
I can try to take notes too.
Okay.
Okay.
So is there any other analyst stuff you need to report, Tully?
Nothing pressing. Yeah.
Okay. Then I guess developer updates. Dan's not here, so I guess I will give mine. I tried to put everything in the doc as before. So we shipped adding sorting to the API, and also have not yet deployed, but just merged after Dan's review some better content type sniffing in the differ, because we made it much more strict a week and a half ago, and that has revealed places where we have lacking metadata. So we're sort of going halfway back by, rather than trying to like sniff the content type, we'll at least look for directives in HTML and XML documents and follow those, because it looks like in most of the cases where we have problematic metadata for headers, we do have like content directives. So that patch sort of tries to follow that, and we'll see if that largely solves the problem when I deploy it later tonight. We'll see over the next week if analysts have run into the issue less. And then also just merged tooling for importing annotations from analyst spreadsheets, which wasn't really on deck to be worked on, but I was working on some other Ruby-based Google Sheets stuff for a client, and so I figured I would just go ahead and do it because it's pretty rudimentary. So rather than having a separate tool in processing now that like pulls them out of one place and then sends them to the DB like we were maybe thinking about before, now there's just a task in the DB that you can just run anytime, and you give it a spreadsheet and you give it the name of, or the user that theoretically made the annotation, which is helpful because it doesn't require any kind of crazy permission stuff to allow some user to import an annotation on behalf of another user. Only a super user who has access to the console on the or access to the DB can do it. But it's an easy script to run and it's relatively safe. So that kind of makes that problem simpler. So that's in. It's not really deployed yet, so we can't run it on production stuff, but I don't think there's an emergency need to run it on production stuff yet. But I'll hopefully have that deployed later tonight also, and we can do it if we want. And then handling multiple URLs or canonical URLs for pages is done. It's still pending review from somebody. If Dan doesn't have time to get to it later this week, I'll probably merge it at the end of the week. But basically, we have a sort of small port of CERT that does a few other things inspired by Purell and some other canonicalization libraries in Ruby. And so now we have this URL key column for pages in addition to the URL. So URL always points to some exact URL that we retrieved content from, but URL key is a canonicalized one that may or may not actually exist, and it's CERT formatted. So that way, all versions, so when you import a version, we basically look for an exact URL match first. If we don't find one, then we look for a URL key canonicalized URL match, and if we do find one, we'll add the version to that page record rather than making a new page record for it. And the reason we check an exact match before the canonicalized match is that allows us to say, oh, these two pages that are actually different wind up with the same canonical URL, but we'll give them different records with different exact URLs. And so that matches first. So we have an easy way to sort of like opt out of canonicalization, like over gobbling things that it shouldn't. I added support for the new maintainers and tags stuff to the scraper. So for those of you who haven't been in on this conversation recently, the DB used to have a concept of an agency that was associated with the page and a site that the page belonged to. And there were a couple problems with those concepts. One was that site was a confusing concept because it's really just a manual categorization. It has nothing to do with domains or paths or like URLs. Agency was a little bit specific. So those terms were both problematic, but the bigger problem is that because of the way Versionista works, we had a lot of pages that we had multiple records of because they existed in multiple sites or had multiple maintaining agencies. So now agencies are called maintainers, and you can have their many-to-many relationship with pages. And then now we also have a tagging system, and instead of having sites, we have tags with the name site : whatever, and those also have a many-to-many relationship with pages. So the support for agency and site are still around, but all the new stuff is in now, so it's a slow transition of getting all the other projects that might talk to the API, either importing things or reading things out to start using the new stuff so that we can get rid of the old stuff. So I did that for the scraper that pulls in data from Versionista. And then on my sort of on deck list to get done this week is to do all that for web monitoring processing and for UI. And then other things kind of on deck is I need to take a look at repairing the staging environments because Dan built it out, sort of a prototype of it in Kubernetes, and we thought that's the direction we were going. But we never quite got all the Docker files for all the various projects merged, and some major things in those projects have changed in the intervening time. So I can't actually build those Docker images anymore. So I either need to update those or come up with a different way to do staging, since Dan is now investigating whether it makes more sense to use like Ansible, which we may still use Docker with, or do something else. And blah, blah, blah. But right now it hasn't been a big problem, but as we're shipping these major API changes, the staging environment is falling behind instead of being ahead. And That is soon going to make the UI project break for anybody who's developing locally against the staging data instead of having their own API project running locally, which is sort of the default config you get when you pull down the project, because we don't expect you to have also set up all these other projects. So that wasn't a big deal, but since the work for figuring out the right deployment scheme has kind of dragged on, it's a big deal now. So I need to take some time and do that. And then, yeah, and then there's a few other like issues that are things that need working on there. So that's it for me. Any questions on that stuff, since it's a lot and kind of complicated?
I was just curious, you mentioned you're actually pulling in the like coding from the Google Sheets. Is that just being stored in a separate, like, I guess, how does that look in relation to the existing database annotations?
It is. So all that script does is it reads a given Google Sheet and optionally a particular tab in that sheet. If you don't give it a tab, it'll just read all of them. And just takes each of those lines and creates an annotation in the database that corresponds to the version that line is about, the change from the version that line is about to the base version.
And I guess we know the UUID. Like, I'm wondering, like, how that link is made definitively, and it's just a UUID or something like that.
We look at the latest to base URL, because my assumption there is, because analysts are always doing their analysis, maybe against the prior version, maybe against base, maybe whatever. So the only thing we can meaningfully say about those spreadsheet rows is latest to base. And we look at the URL, and if it's a Versionista URL, then we find our versions that correspond to those Versionista versions, and we tag it to the change between those. And if it is one of our own URLs for our UI, we have UUIDs in those URLs, so we just pull those out, and that's an easier lookup, but kind of basically the same.
Got it. That makes sense to me, and I think that is probably the right way to do it. The only thing that we should know as a possible concern is that latest to base won't catch if something changed and then changed back. And if then there was an annotation on the change, then the latest to base isn't capturing, you know what I mean? But I think that's very rare, and we probably are doing fine given all the other errors with the coding and uncertainty. I think it's probably fine.
Well, I mean, there's an inherent, I mean, you'd have that even if it wasn't necessarily latest to base. And those records still show up as a change and are still viewable in the UI. You know, you just won't see a meaningful diff in the UI.
Right.
Yeah, like until people are annotating in the UI, where it just annotates the versions you are looking at. Like there's no solve for that problem when somebody in a separate system goes like, oh, I looked at these things over here and I made another record over here. We can only say so much about a guarantee of them having connected those things correctly.
Yeah, I guess the way to think about it is just like from these two time points, we're coding the union of all the possible changes that happen, whether or not they're captured in this, like from the diffs on the edge cases. So
yeah, I think that's the general expectation we're trying to set up with annotations.
Quick question, Rob. Is for the sites maintainers and UI, is that something I can help with, or is there anything that I can help with? It looks like a really long list of things. I know, because you know, like a lot of this is not in my domain, obviously. But if there's anything you think I can help you on,
yeah, I mean, all of the sites maintainers ones are super simple because they're just wherever we're using site or agency, we need to stop using site and agency and instead use tags and maintainers.
Okay, I'll take a look at those things.
Yeah. And depending on the context, that could mean changing what we show in the UI, or it could just be a totally under the hood thing. So,
okay.
Like in the page list view, I think we show site, and we should probably change it to sites and make it a comma separated value that's in that cell.
Makes sense.
But yeah, it's kind of context specific.
I'll give a short update for myself. I've only been working on the page freezer blog post, so totally. So I took out everybody's changes and totally did a final pass. So I just need to incorporate those suggestions, and we should be done with that. I haven't heard back from Dan. He's always busy, so I gave him a little nudge, but not trying to poke him too much. But yeah, that's all I've been really up to in the past week.
Cool. Ray, is that you on the phone?
He is, but there's a chance that he's muted because the host is not. Sometimes when calls join, they're auto muted, so he may not actually. Oh, never mind. I like it.
Muted. Yeah. Right.
So can you hear me or not?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. I just had a quick question about 98. So that, I think, depending upon how far Dan is on the Ansible thing, maybe we can hold off on that until he's closer, because it sounds like that's, he'll need that we'll need 98 when he's ready. Is that right?
If he has stuff working, we don't need 98, but we kind of need 98 in order to do the UI stuff with maintainers and tags, because it's not going to show up in the staging API, because the staging API is now super out of date.
Right. Okay. And for something offline, we can maybe think about how we can sort of have workflows maybe where we push the staging and then to production or something. Would that help? Not help making sure staging is sort of in line with the other stuff?
That has always been the workflow, and we broke it when we got the prototype Kubernetes deployment, because we thought we were all good. We switched on the DNS over, so you can no longer deploy to a different environment. And then we didn't finish merging all the stuff because Dan went to experiment with Ansible, and I think we thought that was going to be a week, and it's now been several. So we didn't worry about it because we didn't think it was going to be a long-term project.
Right. And then that makes sense. Thanks for filling in the gaps. So because I'm also wondering then, is anything on 68, the bulk importing script, still dependent on any other open issues?
It's dependent on the URL key cert stuff, which is it just is pending review.
Okay, great. Because as we've been talking about, I think that's what I'm most eager for you to work on. And so after that the search stuff is pushed through, maybe that's the next thing if you're looking for help on prioritizing. But if we want to talk about it more offline, I'm happy to do that as well.
Okay. Then that's what I'll do. I'm going to prioritize the staging stuff, I think, first, so that nobody else in the universe is blocked by the thing that we point to in all the documentation for what you should use for development works.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Yeah, now it makes sense of why the staging got out of sync, but I'll circle back with Dan as well to see what the status of the Ansible stuff is. Great, thanks. I'll skip my stuff. It's not a big deal. We can take it offline too. And there's activity in the Git issue. So, Brendan, do you want to give your update?
Totally. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll just follow on really quickly with the. It might help if you're Rob, if you're updating all of your Docker files to be relatively recent. I'd be happy to PR in a Docker Compose to like web monitoring UI so that you can just run Docker Compose up and it'll spin up a background version of a backend like fake data version of all of your services that you need to run locally. Might alleviate some of this pressure later on, but it's more of a nice to have than a need to have. But if you do manage to update the Docker files, I'd be happy to PR in a Docker Compose file.
That would be awesome. The DB does come with some seed data, although it probably could be larger and better. But
as long as you have like a general like sort of set of flows that'll get you at least enough seed data that it makes sense, then yeah, Docker Compose has gotten us out of a bunch of headaches there, just because you just type up and it spins up a copy of every service you need, and then it's all local. Cool. Yeah. Anyways, neat. So yeah, we wanted to give you guys a quick update. We've been talking a bunch internally at Query, and we've realized that the web monitoring project is like a potentially represents a great chance for us to iterate on some problem sets that we've been working on. And so basically I wanted to join the call with Tom here and say, we want to show up and see if we can help the web monitoring project in any sort of material way. And the places where we're the most able to help sort of surrounds data set diffing. And so Rob and I had spoken a couple weeks ago about this question that comes up among analysts surrounding a URL has disappeared on a page, or a URL has changed in some way on a page. And can you, is it possible to sort of like, do we have this technology that'll let us sort of like keep track of how sitemaps have changed over time? And so we initially sort of batted around the idea of using Sentry, which is a crawler that we've written for the archiving side of Edgy's work. And while we thought that was accurate, I sort of, Rob sort of very quickly pointed out this problem of you actually need to version the links as well as the pages, which is a very, if you do it the way that Sentry was doing it, that would be a very expensive and costly in terms of storage. And so the other side of this is the actual archiving DB that manages the versions and the snapshots of those pages is starting to get a little expensive. And so we've been looking for ways to sort of get around the bulk and size of that database. And as it turns out, we happen to build this like distributed dataset version control system that might be applicable in this context. And so we actually have two updates for you guys that we sort of want to just put on the table as potentially helpful and see if we can't sort of be of assistance to the web monitoring project. So the first one is a snapshotting of EPA.gov, the main domain, which we've now started doing. We've done 2 snapshots now. I want to do a third one and just start working through that. And we have code that we can send you. Tom, do you mind pasting in the link to the recipes repo? And so that's the first thing. So basically what we're doing is we're crawling. We had to write a crawler that knows how to back off when it gets 403 responses, just because EPA.gov gets really angry really fast. But the snapshots are working. The first snapshot is about a gig of JSON. And it took roughly 24 hours to do the first pass. So it's pretty aggressive. And that was only after we'd written some throttling negotiation tricks. The crawler that we've written is parallelized as necessary, so it can run up to a number of sequential or simultaneous requests. And so we tried the same thing on HUD.gov, and HUD was much happier with us. And so it was able to sort of like, we were able to crawl HUD much quicker. But what this gives, and hopefully might be of some use to the web monitoring project, is it starts to set the stage for answering the question that an analyst would have of a URL has disappeared or has changed in some way on a page. And you want to be able to ask the question, how many references to this URL were there last week? And how many references to that URL are there now? And what pages made those references? And so those questions are possible and something that we're really excited to work on at Query, because we think it represents a really nice use case of the technology that we're building. And so with that, we're sort of like hoping to sort of bring that forward, show it to you guys, and we'll sort of do the ingest and the work. But we just need you guys to sort of use it and give us some feedback. We don't really know that it's dependable yet, so we sort of want to give this a couple of iterations of trial run before we know that it's real. But so far things are looking pretty good internally. And the other side of this is, I have Tom on the call here. He's our lead data science individual. wow, we need better job titles. Tom's also been working on a recipe for data.json for individual sort of servings of open data catalogs from each individual agency. Tom, do you want to give a quick update on what that is able to do?
Sure. So I guess anything that fits into or a project, or I don't know if I'm going to call this the right thing. The JSON, well, has a JSON schema described in a data.json, or it's just sort of it's the same recipe. So if it's EPA or the Bureau of Fiscal Service or the Census, it's has all the data to just run and pull down the data catalog.
Thanks, dude. And so what that, do you mind me to, because we're going to echo like crazy, sorry. Yeah, so what that lets us do is we can actually snapshot and version the data.json offering. So the actual data catalog of the open available data, we can see if that has changed at all, which might be, we don't know if that is changing rapidly. I've taken some like just sort of ad hoc samples of the EPA data.json, and I've seen the size in megabytes vary by at least 5 or 6 megabytes between versions, which could just be all metadata, could be something. We have never actually jammed it into query and like seen what the diff is. But yeah, the recipe, I'm going to link you the recipe here. We call these things recipes, which are just like scripts for automating the ingest of these data sets and adding them to a distributed network. So that the one that Tom has written applies to any government agency, and that recipe includes a list of URLs that have actually already worked for the ingest. So totally, I think this might be particularly interesting as it's sort of, as you're broadening the applicability of the web monitoring project, this might be of value to you guys. Obviously, this is outside of the realm of HTML diffing. We're now in the realm of dataset diffing. So we don't know if that actually like sort of is in scope of the project or isn't, but it's something that we could sort of sidecar and bring into the mix and see if it starts to provide value. And if not, the sort of aim of our showing up here is not to sort of create more work for you guys, but instead to try and help move things forward. But yeah, so this is stuff that we're working on a few features to make this a little more palatable from a user-friendly side. Our front end is launching at the end of this week. And next week, we're hoping to ship some features that will let you filter out a diff to sort of, one of the big problems with these sitemap sort of snapshots is they also come with date stamps. And so if you try to calculate the diff of a 1 gigabyte JSON file and every JSON date stamp is different, you end up with every single thing has changed. And so it's a bit aggressive. And so you need a way to sort of filter I just want to see the link differences on. And then ideally, I just want to see the entries that contain this URL filtered and diffed. And so those things are forthcoming. We don't know how long that's going to take, but the snapshots are being generated now. And so then we can sort of retroactively start to look at some of those. How that intersects with the actual tooling and support that you guys are building, total open question. We don't have to do anything. Yeah. Go for it, Rob.
Is that diffing functionality that's part of query? Is it possible to run it separately against like 2 arbitrary JSON blobs or CSVs? So that way, in the interim time that there's not sort of like a built-in functionality of saying, oh, I want to diff it this way, we could just pull out the 2 data sets, do our own processing of them, and then feed them back into query to use its diffing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I mean, that's just basically retrieving the snapshots and doing whatever you want on them. And so yeah. Query handles the storage and dissemination of snapshots as you need them. But we can, and so it's distributed, so anybody can grab a copy of that. But you can pull it out, do whatever you want with it, or sort of just grab the raw data from version A, version B, write a scripts type thing. So all possible. Any questions generate out of that? Does any of this sound interesting, appealing?
It sounds super awesome. Is the stuff that whether it's based on Sentry or not, that is your crawl results with the links. Does either the scripts for that also have a recipe or something similar that lives somewhere public?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't. Yeah,
is the data somewhere?
Yes. So I haven't posted the data yet. You'll need query to get the data, which we have. Tom, is that up now? I think It's on your node, but we don't, Tom's node doesn't stay online all the time. But yeah, we do, both recipes are up. The sitemap generator is here, and I will send you guys the config file for the EPA. I haven't published the configuration for the EPA crawl because I don't want people to run that script unless they know what they're doing.
Right.
So I'll publish that on our internal channels, but it's, yeah, it's straightforward, generates some good stuff. But yeah, it's working. And that, so I just linked to the Open Data Catalog crawler and the sitemap. The sitemap recipe works on any URL you want. And you can sort of constrict it to domains as necessary. So feel free to play around with those. And if they break or have issues, we would love you to tell us, and then we will fix them. But beyond that, yeah.
How long did the HUD one take? Because you said it went faster.
Yeah, it was 9 or 10 hours to do the crawl on the HUD, and because it would let us, EPA was capping us out at about 35 requests a second for a little while, or requests a minute a little while, and then as soon as like 10 or 11 p.m. hit, we would often get up to like 80 or 100 requests a minute, and it wasn't 403ing us. And then HUD was letting us do like 120 requests a minute, 160 requests a minute, no problem. And so HUD might not have a back off, like a rate limiter built in, and so we were a little bit careful. We didn't want to like bombard them, but because you can spin this thing up to like 100 requests a second, and it'll hurt something. But yeah. Totally. Did you have a question?
Yeah, a lot of questions, but it sounds awesome, and I guess I think what we'd be, I think the website monitoring team would be really excited to try some of these things out. We are already basically constantly asked these questions of like, are there links to, like, is this resource truly like islanded, or like people are now using the word like isness if it's we're coming up with the terminology. But I'm wondering, sort of, is this something that you're thinking of making like really easy to use for like non-technical
normal people?
Normal people. And if not, I think we're friends with people who know how to do things. And like, are there test cases that would be useful for you? And because we have a lot of questions that we would love answered for our reports, but also a concern that I have with the same as the one I mentioned before, which is like, what are you not catching, and what are the, is there a way to validate it somehow, have a secondary validation, because I'm thinking of like a New York Times article that says like, this is not truly, there's no links to all links, like some statement like all links to X have been removed, and if we end up being wrong, that's not good.
Yeah.
So how, I'd be curious to hear all your thoughts there, but going to take this offline.
Yeah. Okay, trying to answer those in order. User friendliness. Very, very interested in building something user friendly in terms of like, so we have a front end that requires no command line knowledge. For now, you do have to run a command to actually spin it up. Eventually, it'll just be an Electron app, and so you can literally just click and go, "Hey, here's Edgy's sitemap of EPA. Great, click that. Here's the versions of it. Cool. Show me a diff. Cool." Those tools are intended to work on sort of general data set questions, and so the question of how many pages link to this URL, that's, I think, is a place where we might need a little bit of tooling to sort of help bridge the gap. I think it'd be amazing if an analyst can ask that question and sort of like punch it into a sort of script type way. That would be awesome. And so that's something that might be a little bit outside of what we can do sort of immediately, but the actual capacity for that, we could see if we can't find someone to work on that. But I think it'd be really helpful if the analyst could have just like a really quick, here's the snapshots, compare snapshot A, snapshot B, and this URL or this list of URLs, and have it just crunch for them. That's a script. That's not an application. It's something that we can do relatively quickly. It's just a question of building it and writing it. As for the auditability of this stuff, I think that's part of the reason I want to sort of just like trial run this and like see if it's doing what we think it's doing. And also Jess had a really good point a couple of weeks ago about trying to look at the Internet Archive's sort of versions of this, building a version that can actually build sitemaps from work files, and so that we have an auditable sort of copy of that. And so that's, I think that would be an amazing thing to sort of pursue. Generally, I mean, obviously we've written a bunch of Golang work interaction tools, and we've actually had a couple of contributors sort of come out of the woodwork who are really excited to work on those libraries. So I've gotten like 3 pull requests in the last like 36 hours on that project, which has been awesome. So it might actually be real to start sort of compare them to archives, because I think we might actually, like, obviously the live web versus the archives is very different, but this question of also making that as audible as possible. As it stands right now, the sitemap generator doesn't record the IP address of the requester, which is one of the only missing things from its sort of authenticity or authentication trail that it would need. But that's a 2-hour fix to add in beyond that, or it's where you can use query to just add them to the metadata, your own thing. Also, importantly, everything that you add to query is actually cryptographically signed by the user that created it. And so there is an audit trail to all the data that's added. So whoever creates these sitemaps is going on the record as saying, to my best of my knowledge, this is how the data looked. And so I'm happy for that to be us. I'm not happy for us to say we are 100% certain that this is 100% accurate, but we can get as close as possible.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's worth a couple other things there. Like doing past stuff with Internet Archive would be awesome, but we should also all keep in mind that we can't say anything nearly as authoritative from that data as we can from what we can do with this tool going forward against the live web. Just because any analysis we do off of Internet Archive data depends entirely on how comprehensive Internet Archive's information is, and we know that it's not always particularly comprehensive, but it's still worth doing. So agree with everybody on that, but also just want to keep putting that reminder in the ring that doing it against that data doesn't give us the same sort of authoritativeness as doing it against the live web going forward to the future. And I think so this sounds awesome, and I'm trying to figure out, we should figure out, as you start to feel like this is more solid and production-y, the first task is to have it running on a schedule, like once every other week or once a week or once a month against all of whatever sites we care about. Mm-hmm. And then putting the output of that data into query. Mm-hmm. And then developing the tools, as you mentioned, that make it easy to ask a particular question of it, is this thing an island, or what points to it or not? Totally.
Yeah, and that's the approach we've taken. We're sort of today we're focused on sort of building up a repository that we can actually start to learn from and check for bugs. One of the biggest, already we're starting to see a couple of things. Yeah, and just to your point, Rob, the sitemaps that we're generating are already larger, as far as I can tell, than what the IA is generating. And so and on top of that, just 301 redirects, realizing that actually has a dramatic impact on the sitemap of a page has been really interesting. Particularly the EPA is doing a ton of redirecting, which it doesn't surprise me, because they've done a bunch of website migrations over time. But there's some really interesting sort of outcomes from that. Just measuring size of pages and number of redirects, there's some crazy stats that seem to be piling up really quickly, and link frequency. And so, yeah, I want to powwow with you specifically on making sure our cert strategies match, so that we have good interop there. But there's a couple of things there. But already some interesting things are cropping up just watching the sort of archives fly by.
Yeah, cool. I definitely I would want to talk with you more, probably not now, about all the stuff about redirects, because that's something that is also an itch in the back of my mind that I know we're handling poorly, and have sort of avoided having a real discussion about how we track and talk about a redirect, right?
Mm-hmm.
What happens when a page's raw content came from another URL because there were 3 redirects in the middle, which is
a very interesting. Yeah, and so we've actually, the recipe that we've posted checks every time you are redirected, it records it as page A points to page B points to page C actually has content. And so that alone has shown up, because the files were it was 1.5 GB before we did the redirect stuff, and then it dropped a bunch just based on that. So it's there's some interesting stuff there. But happy to powwow on. We should totally set up some time to chat later. But We're also, to that point, we're available. We've internally have decided that you guys are like a passion project of ours, and so we want to sort of see if we can help. Yeah, I think it's great work.
Awesome.
Cool. I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thanks, Brendan. That sounds all really excellent. Just quickly, I think to wrap things up, Kevin, I think you mentioned the Facebook blog post. Also, the Cyber Clinic doc is under review for comments. And I'll sort of try to circulate that again in case anyone has any ideas. I know we've gone quite a bit over, but I think everything we talked about is really important. Is there anything else before we wrap things up?
Nope.
Nope.
Great. Kevin, if you could just, I don't know if you saw it, but if you could just, or somebody, just capture some of the links that were probably in the chat and throw them into the doc, that'd be great, just so we have, I think someone's doing that already, actually.
Yeah, I sent on Slack already.
Oh, cool. Great. Thank you. Great. Thanks, everyone. And we'll follow up on our action items offline or in Slack.
Good seeing everybody.
Sounds good. Great seeing all of you.
Bye.
Bye.